good morning, and good morning. So, I know I've shared this a few times, but I was speaking to somebody yesterday and I started to tell him about this situation, and he was like, "Wow, David, I've never heard you talk about that." And so, for anyone who hasn't, um, last year my denture broke, and that's an aggravation. It's an annoyance. It's a hindrance. It's just annoying. Okay, it's a lot of things, right? So as annoyed as I was, and I go to the dental clinic, and the receptionist is transgender. So here I am in need of this dental clinic. So I'm looking up. I'm like, this is really funny, Lord. So I'm telling myself, David, don't don't say too much. And this man, this confused man on the other side of this desk, he's the one that's going to make your appointments. He might even be able to mess with your new dentures. Yeah, don't tick him off, right? So I start going back in for my 2-week appointments, and it's a long process. And now each time I go in, now he starts flirting with me. Yeah, it was kind of ironic, because here was this transgender flirting with an ex-transgender and don't even know it. So one morning I was going up, and there's a little cafe downstairs in the building. So I went and got me a coffee, and I got an extra coffee and a couple creamers and some sugars, and brought it up and say, here you go. How about a coffee? And he says, wow, thanks. So then I start really chit-chatting. But let me tell you, the first time I went in, and I went back, and the nurse said to me, did the young lady at the front desk give you any paperwork? I couldn't bite my tongue. I said, well, I must have been at the wrong front desk, because there's no young lady up there. And she looked at me, the nurse did, with her little cross around her neck. And she looked at me and she goes, Bella, she's a woman. I said, no, he's a man. And unless you people tell him he's a man, he's going to continue to be deceived, and he's going to die in his sin. I said, and you may be held responsible, for not telling him. And so she walked away. She didn't have anything else to say. And then I met the dentist, and the dentist was a Christian. So I asked the dentist, I said, so how do you deal with the young man at the front? You know what the Christian dentist told me? I tried to avoid that person. The Christian dentist couldn't even say, I tried to avoid him, but look at the whole root of that statement. I tried to avoid. Christian in name only. Who knows? The Lord knows. The Lord knows. So if you don't want to offend somebody, the Lord knows your heart. The Lord knows if you're denying him or not, and you know what he said in his word. You deny him, and he will deny you before the Father. Hallelujah. So I continue going back, and every 2 weeks. And so the one visit to the dental clinic, I come out, and actually I go in, and he goes, oh, are you here to see me? And I said, yeah. And I walked over. I says, and while I'm here, let me put some money down on my dentures. And he says, okay. So as we're chit-chatting, I lost my whole train of thought. It's as I'm talking to this young man, he goes like this. He starts messing with his mascara. And he says, sometimes I hate being a girl. And I thought, wow, door open. And I leaned over the counter. I said, so stop. And he looked at me. He says, it's not that easy. I said, yeah, it is. And then he looked at me again and he goes, look, it took me a long time to get to where I'm at, and it's not that easy. And I leaned over the counter and I said, listen, the man that you are speaking to, the man that you've been flirting with for the past month and a half, used to be transgender. And yeah, it is that easy. And he looked at me and he says, interesting. And that was it. He handed me my appointment card. Now, this is a Monday. So Tuesday, I'm heading to a men's group. And, I never answer my phone if I don't recognize the number, because 9 times out of 10, it's some telemarketer or telling me, or somebody telling me they're sending me, I just inherited $18 million from a long lost relative in Soviet Union somewhere, who knows. But so I didn't recognize the number, but I'm heading to a men's group to speak. And so I thought, well, maybe it's one of them, making sure I'm coming. So I answer the phone and it's his voice. It's this transgender receptionist. And he says, I'm calling to confirm your appointment. I said, listen, we just made this appointment yesterday. You don't call 2 weeks ahead of time to confirm an appointment. Is there something you want to talk about? And he says to me, you talk and I'll listen. And I poured into him. And all I had to do was to tell him about him by telling him about me. And when I talked about being molested or recruited, he resonated with that. And when I spoke about having no father, he resonated with that. When I talked about the prostitution and the drugs and the alcohol and all of the things that consist of being in that world, he resonated. And then I said to him, I said, and you know what? He said, what? I says, the absolute only place I could find any form of happiness was in being who I wasn't. And he said, interesting. And then he had to go because he was at work. And I told him, I said, stay in touch. Keep my number. And I went back in for my appointment a couple weeks later. I got my denture, and I came out and I smiled at him and I went. And he says, looks good. And so I looked around and I said, okay, nobody's around. What's your name? And he looked at me and he said, Bella. I said, no. I said, what's your name? What's the name you were born with? And he says, I don't use that name. That person doesn't exist. And I said, well, you better hope that person exists, because I'm trying to pray for you and to intercede for you. And I can't pray to my God for you using a name that he doesn't recognize. What's your name? And it was like, you see, a light bulb went off and he goes, Brian. And I said, okay, Brian, I'll be interceding for you and praying for you. I went back in once again, and I noticed that he had his hair pulled back, no makeup on, and some baggy clothes. Still had his nails done and still had jewelry on, but he wasn't all purdied up, so to speak. Was that the beginning of something? I don't know, because I haven't been back and he hasn't called me again. But praise the Lord that door opened. You know, we are so deceived. The enemy has twisted and tainted things from the very beginning of time. I mean, think about it. Homosexuality, and I have to state this, transgenderism is homosexuality in distress. Okay? Because if you are born a male and you lay with another male, and it doesn't matter if one of those males thinks they shoulda, coulda, woulda, wanna be, competitive be, or dress up and pretend to be the opposite sex, they're still a male. Okay? When you can be as transgender as you want, you can go have sexual reassignment surgery, you can do all of that. And when you die and they dig your body up 300 years from now and they do a DNA test, it'll be the body of an unknown male. Okay? Never. You know, we see all these archaeologists digging up all these bones and just look throughout history, all the Egyptian tombs and everything that's found. Never have they said, we found the tomb of a cisgender or an agender or a whatever gender. Never. They always find the remains of a male or a female. So we are so deceived. And if you really think about it, so homosexuality is a direct and it's a deliberate attack against God's very thought of creation. It's an attack against his very intent of creating male and female, right? So we've been so deceived, and even now we have all of these ex-homosexual ministries, and we have all of this arguing over conversion therapy and reparative therapy. And you know what? I don't support any of that nonsense because it's nonsense. And conversion therapy and reparative therapy are garbage because Jesus is the only conversion therapy that exists. Okay, and while there are people who try to give credit to the therapy for them no longer being homosexual, it was only through and with Jesus that they could come out of that darkness. Okay, so and we can be made free, we can be set free from any addiction. But we also will remain separated from Jesus if we don't surrender to Jesus, right? So I'm all over the place today because I got a zillion things running around in my head about this nonsense of all these ex-homosexual ministries that are out there talking about there is freedom from SSA, from same-sex attraction. Now, listen to me, people. Same-sex attraction does not exist. I know a lot of people are saying, well, sure it does, because, David, there are a lot of people right now, a lot of men that are attracted to men and a lot of women that are attracted to women. Well, guess what? There's a lot of men that are attracted to children. There's a lot of men that are attracted to drugs. There are a lot of men and women that are attracted to alcohol. There's a lot of women attracted to animals. Just because they're tempted into a sin doesn't mean that that is who and what they are. If we understand intimacy, if we really understand intimacy, that it is not sexual, then guess what? Then we can understand how easy it would be for us to get this desire for intimacy confused and then misidentify it as an attraction. There is no such thing as a same-sex attraction. All it is a misidentified, okay, it's an incorrectly identified natural desire for intimacy. You have boys that are desiring some male affirmation in their life. They're desiring some male intimacy in their life, and because this culture, this society, this world, of which we have to remember who is the God of this world, because that is not who many of us try to make it be. The God of this world is the enemy. God relinquished control to him. That's why we are in this world and not of this world once we become children of God. So we have a natural desire to share intimacy. A little boy has a natural desire to share intimacy with a man, right? Well, society and culture in this world and the enemy is tainting his mind to make him think that he's attracted to men. So automatically, if we're attracted to something, it has to be romantic and or sexual, which we know. What if it's not an attraction? If it's not an attraction, then it doesn't have to be romantic and or sexual. Now listen. In the past, I have said many times that I was battling a same-sex attraction. So about a year ago, well, less than a year ago, I got on my face before the Lord. I said, God, I'm faithful. I have great faith. It'll be 10 years soon. Can you please remove this attraction? And it was almost audible what the Spirit placed on me, on my heart. That I wanted God to remove something that he placed in me simply because I misidentified it, simply because I identified it incorrectly. So I wanted the Lord to remove something that was part of my nature, part of my character, because I didn't identify it correctly. I started digging into my notes and all of the studies on intimacy. I'm like blown away that day I recognized intimacy for exactly what it was. I also recognized that day that my desire for intimacy with another man and with other men wasn't an attraction at all. So in the days to come, while I didn't quite understand how I can actually have this knowledge that I don't have an attraction, but yet there's still some type of temptation remaining, and it's sexual. And I'm not quite getting it. And then within a few days, I get a phone call from a young man. And this young man says, you spoke at my church. Could we meet? I would really like to talk to you. I said, absolutely. So we meet. And he says, look, I'm engaged. And we have a child on the way. And I'm getting ready to say my vows in a few weeks. And I'm guilty of the sin of homosexuality. I said, okay. And we started talking about what it was. And he says to me, now remember, here I am, I'm in the midst of this total about face in my thinking of this desire that I have, that it's not an attraction, that it is a desire for intimacy, a natural God-given desire. And so as I'm in this transition but I'm still not understanding how there are still some fleshly temptations or sexual desires there, this young man looks at me and he says, and it's not about the attraction, because I'm not attracted to men. I said, what do you mean? He says, it's about the taboo of two men coming together. He says, listen, he says, I'm not attracted to the guys that I've messed around with. He says, most of them are very physically unattractive, elderly, overweight, or whatever. He says, it just doesn't matter what it looks like. It just has to be male in order for my flesh to desire that coming together, that taboo, that perversion, basically. And I was blown away, and I really started getting it and really started thinking, I'm like, wow, it's not about the attraction. It's about the perversion of it. You know, when I got out of prison, I was a male with breasts, but I no longer wanted to dress like a female. I still return to my vomit like any other dog when they're not saved and haven't surrendered. Okay, I didn't get out of prison and become a man of God. I got out of prison, but what I did do is I got out of prison and I no longer felt comfortable dressing like a woman, or I didn't want to put makeup on, and I was kind of thought, well, wow, now you're in a real pickle, because now you want to be a homosexual male and you got breasts and you look like a woman, and now you're just going to be like this freak of nature. And guess what? It didn't matter what I looked like. The same men, the men that I thought would only deal with me because I looked like a woman, dealt with me looking like a man. It didn't matter, because it's not about this the homosexuality or the it's not about bestiality or pedophilia or homosexuality or any of this other stuff. It's not about an attraction. It's about the perversion. And it's about the perversion and the desires of the flesh, because we are shaped in perversion. We're shaped in iniquity, right? Born into sin, shaped in iniquity. And iniquity at its root is perversion. So we're all shaped in perversion. We're all a bunch of perverts. And that's what it was. So here the Lord placed this man right in my path, right when I needed that message. And then we could talk about it. You know, the enemy has infiltrated everybody, and anybody. First of all, the LGBT movement is a movement. It is not a community. I always believed I was a part of a community. When I look at it now, I see it for what it is. It's a movement, and anyone that is a part of that movement should be ticked off. You should be angry as hell, and you should be more offended at that they've tricked you, that they've duped you, that you've been bamboozled. You should be angry and mad and ticked off that you've been bamboozled, that you've been fooled, that you've been deceived, that you've been cheated and deluded, that you've been double-crossed and suckered in, that you've been snookered by this movement, and that you've been caught up in this big lie, and they're using you like a guinea pig. They're using you, and they're playing off your thoughts and feelings. And oh, Lord have mercy. You should be outraged. You should be outraged that this movement, that the enemy has taken you from the very beginning and tainted your mind to believe that you are not what you were created to be. You should be furious. You should be so disgusted with the movement itself, that it has indoctrinated you. And those of you who aren't a part of this movement, you should be just as ticked off that it's indoctrinating your children and your grandchildren. That's what you should be. You should be so angry at this movement, because let me say this once again. When I say the LGBT movement, I do not mean the individuals that are marching down the street with rainbow body paint on and feather boas, parading their sin. When I say LGBT movement, I do not mean your coworker, your male coworker that wants to wear a dress to work. When I say LGBT movement, I don't mean Bob and Bill, or Lisa and Mary Jane that live down at the end of the block, that, oh, they don't bother anybody. Why is everybody always picking on them? When I say LGBT movement, I don't mean your son or your daughter, your brother or your sister that has cried in your arms at night, that has attempted to take their life because they don't understand why God would make them that way, when they don't want to be that way. And I'm going to tell you this, you are born that way. We're all born that way. In whatever way we've been deceived, we're all born that way. That's why Jesus said to be born again. It is who we are. That's why Jesus said, deny yourself. But when I say LGBT movement, I don't mean any of them, because none of those examples are the LGBT movement. They are all victims of the LGBT movement. And if you're trapped in that death style, I can't call it a lifestyle because I know what it leads to personally. But if you're trapped in that death style, then listen to me. You're a victim. You've been victimized. You've been bamboozled. You've been fooled. You've been tricked. You have been indoctrinated. And there is freedom from all that. You know, all the misery, I know. See, you can't tell me, you can't smile in my face and tell me you ain't miserable. You can't smile in my face and tell me you happy and full of joy. Because I know the lie. You see, one thing you have to know is that it wouldn't be called deception if you knew you were being deceived. Lord willing, I will see you all tomorrow morning. Have a blessed day. I love you all. Peace.